surrounded by his disciples. We can see the wounds in his hands and feet made by the nails during the crucifixion, and the wound in his side made by a spear after he was dead. Christ is looking at Thomas, here in the red and green, and Thomas is leaning forward to touch the wound in Christ's side. After Christ's death and resurrection, he shows himself to his disciples, appearing among them when they're in a locked room. The disciple Thomas isn't with them, and when the others tell him that they have seen Christ, he says that he won't believe them unless he sees and touches Christ's wounds for himself. A week later, the disciples are again in a locked room, and Christ appears among them. He tells Thomas to look at his hands and to touch the wound in his side, and he says, "Do not doubt, but believe." And doubting Thomas, as he's often called, immediately responds, "My Lord and my God." Once you know the story, it's not hard to sympathize with Thomas. He knew that Christ was human. He knew that he was dead. It took an encounter with the resurrected Christ himself to make Thomas recognize his divinity. Cima's painting shows us the challenge facing an artist depicting Christ. In a way, using the story of Thomas is simpler for an artist painting for a Christian audience. The viewers can do the work if they know the narrative. But most of the time, the artist has to treat the viewer a bit like Thomas. We are the ones whom the artist needs to show that Christ is human and divine. The challenge of painting the united humanity and divinity of Christ is a uniquely complex one. In fact, there's something extraordinarily audacious about Christian art. If we think about the historical context from which it emerged, it's astonishing that it ever did. The Hebrew Bible has a prohibition against graven images, and Christian communities developed in a pagan Greco-Roman world that was full of multiple deities who could change their appearance. But Christians believed that one particular man was God incarnate, not a deity who changes shape, not a man with magic powers, but fully human and fully divine. Now, how on earth do you paint that? Christian art attempts to do something which no other art form has ever tried to do. And the history of Christian art is, in one sense, a history of artistic responses to this enormous challenge of painting Christ. It's an attempt which must necessarily ultimately fail. Neither words nor images can fully describe God, nor can they explain how the human and the divine could be united in one person. Nevertheless, Christians have used both words and pictures to explore their experiences of God and their belief in the incarnation. And just as some religious language explicitly acknowledges its own inadequacy, so some painters have drawn attention visually to the paradoxical nature of attempting to depict Christ. In these short films, we're going to explore some of the ways in which painters create and play with paradox, how they invite us to ponder the mystery of the incarnation and encourage us to ask questions. The audacity of Christian art lies in this continued attempt to undertake a truly impossible task.